In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the books that I plan to read for the month of September. So I'm going to start off by talking about the nonfiction books. The first book is called Black Marxism, The Making of the Black Radical Tradition, and it's written by Cedric Robinson. This book seems to deal with both history and politics, and Robinson was a Black American. The book is described as follows. In this ambitious work, first published in 1983, Cedric Robinson demonstrates that efforts to understand Black people's history of resistance solely through the prism of Marxist theory are incomplete and inaccurate. Marxist analyses tend to presuppose European models of history and experience that downplay the significance of Black people and Black communities as agents of change and resistance. Black radicalism must be linked to the traditions of Africa and the unique experiences of Blacks on Western continents, Robinson argues, and any analysis of African American history need to acknowledge this. To illustrate his argument, Robinson traces the emergence of Marxist ideology in Europe, the resistance by Blacks in historically oppressive environments, and the influence of both of these traditions on such important 20th century Black radical thinkers as W.E. Du Bois, C.L.R. James, and Richard Wright. So even though it doesn't really explain that in the description, from my understanding, this book is actually a critique of Marxism, essentially saying that Marxism is Eurocentric in nature. I have started listening to this. I purchased the audiobook, and from what I can see so far, this book seems to be extremely expansive in scope. The current chapter I'm reading looks at the concept of the bourgeoisie and how that concept first arose in history. And I was then also looking through the table of contents, and I can see that the book deals with the history of the English working class, socialist theory that influenced Karl Marx. It looks at African history, the history of the slave trade, then looks at revolutions in Haiti, Brazil, the West Indies, and African countries. And then the last chunk of the book seems to be Robinson talking about Black radical thinkers like Du Bois, C.L.R. James, and Richard Wright. I've read bits and pieces of work from all of those authors, so I'm hoping reading this book will actually force me to go back and read works by Du Bois, C.L.R. James, and especially Richard Wright. I haven't read his works since I think I was in high school. The second nonfiction book that I plan to read this month is Decolonial Marxism, Essays from the Pan-African Revolution by Walter Rodney. And this has a fairly long description, so I'm just going to give that a read. Decolonial Marxism records such a life by collecting previously unbound essays written during the world-turning days of Black Revolution. In drawing together pages where he elaborates on the nexus of race and class, offers his reflections on radical pedagogy, outlines programs for newly independent nation states, considers the challenges of anti-colonial historiography, and produces balance sheets for a dozen wars for national liberation. This volume captures something of the range of power of Rodney's output, but it also demonstrates the unbending consistency that unites his life and work, the ongoing reinvention of living conception of Marxism, and a respect for the still untapped potential of mass self-rule. I do know a fair amount about African history, but I haven't really read a lot about it in recent years. So I figured I wanted to look into the decolonial movements within Africa, and then eventually expand to look at the Middle East and then Asian decolonial movements. So the next book that I plan to read is The Patriarchs by Angela Saini. This book, it's essentially looking at feminism, but more so from like a scientific or possibly anthropological perspective. And the author is British. So reading a description of the book, in this bold and radical book, award-winning science journalist Angela Saini explores the roots of what we call patriarchy, uncovering a complex history of how it first became embedded in societies and spread across the globe from prehistory into the present. She travels to the world's earliest known human settlements, analyzes the latest research findings in science and archaeology, and traces cultural and political histories from the Americas to Asia, finding that in societies where women left their own families to live with their husbands, marriage customs came to be informed by the widespread practice of captive taking and slavery. eventually shaping laws that alienated women from symptoms of support and denied them equal rights, and that there was enormous variation in gender and power in many societies for thousands of years, but colonialism and empire dramatically changed ways of life across Asia, Africa, and the Americas, spreading rigidly patriarchal customs and undermining how people organized their families and work. But The Patriarchs is a profoundly hopeful book, one that reveals a multiplicity to human arrangements that undercuts the old grand narratives and exposes male supremacy as no more and no less than an ever-shifting element in systems of control. So I started listening to this audiobook yesterday. So far I've been liking it, and I talk a little bit more about it in my reading vlog, so I will include that when I post it at the end of this week. So the next book I want to talk about is Our History is the Future: Standing Rock versus the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Long Tradition of Indigenous Resistance by Nick Estes. And so this is written by an Indigenous author. He is a citizen of the Lower Brule Sioux tribe, and he co-founded the Red Nation, which is an Indigenous resistance organization. I would categorize this in the genre of history, although I do think it also could overlap with politics. So this book is described as follows. In 2016, a small protest encampment at the Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota, initially established to block construction of the Dakota Access Oil Pipeline, grew to be the largest Indigenous protest movement in the 21st century. Water protectors knew this battle for Native sovereignty had already been fought many times before, and that, even after the encampment was gone, their anti-colonial struggle would continue. In Our History is the Future, Nick Estes traces traditions of Indigenous resistance that led to the #NoDAPL movement. Our History is the Future is at once a work of history, a manifesto, and an intergenerational story of resistance. So I came across this book actually today. I had really been wanting to include a book that dealt with Indigenous resistance, Indigenous history, but I have been looking for the past 2 weeks and couldn't find a book that really felt right to me. I found a few history books, but none of them were written by Indigenous authors, and I'm just a little bit over reading history that is not told by the people themselves. And I had found a few books that were sort of like manifestos or dealt with resistance, but a lot of them seem to be a little bit outdated. And I've spoken about this quite a bit on my channel. I struggle a lot with nonfiction books because I find a lot of them can be a little bit dry. And last month I did read, I think, almost all of the nonfiction books that I listed, but I didn't enjoy my reading experience. So I really wanted this month to pick nonfiction books that I was going to be excited to read and that were a little bit more anti-establishment in nature. So I came across this book today, and luckily my library had a copy of the audiobook available, so I gave that a listen as I was getting ready, and I really enjoyed it. So I will be giving this book a read. I've been wanting to learn much more about Indigenous history, Indigenous resistance. I think one way of having guidance about how to navigate settler colonialism is by looking at Indigenous resistance movements and looking at Indigenous history. I also think the legacy of colonialism is just so clear when it comes to looking at Indigenous communities, and I think we have a responsibility to really educate ourselves about the way in which settler colonialism has impacted Indigenous people and to act in solidarity towards them with respect to their movements for resistance against their oppressors. So I've been really wanting to pick up at least one book every month that deals with Indigenous history, Indigenous resistance. I actually found a lot of books, but this one seems to be the most aligned with what I'm looking for. So yeah, I will be chatting about this in my reading vlog as I go throughout the month. So if you're interested in hearing what this book is about in more detail, then feel free to check those out when I post them. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Everythink War: Amazon's Ruthless Quest to Own the World and Remake Corporate Power by Dana Mattioli. But I have been really interested in Lena Khan, who is the current commissioner at the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. And this book does have a chapter dealing just with the FTC Commission and their lawsuit against Amazon. But I have been wanting to learn about Amazon as a whole. A few weeks ago, I watched the PBS Frontline documentary that's about Amazon. I have the name of it here. Amazon Empire, The Rise and Reign of Jeff Bezos. And it was really eye-opening, very long and detailed documentary, but I do tend to like Frontline because they go in a lot of detail and you can tell their documentaries are well researched. And there was one aspect where they were talking about the fact that Amazon purposely has always listed their books at a loss, which is part of the reason why their books are just so much cheaper than anywhere else, especially an independent bookstore. I got rid of my Amazon Prime membership last July, and I actually haven't missed it as much as I thought I would, and I am like the queen of online shopping, so giving up on next day delivery was a big thing for me, especially when I was working as a busy lawyer. But it is a decision that I have not regretted, but I have been wanting to learn more about Amazon and just the way in which they operate essentially as a monopoly, and what we as individuals can possibly do to help alleviate some of the issues that we're facing when it comes to Amazon and their just complete domination of the market. I just want to read what the book's about because I think the description is really good and it's very detailed. In 2017, Lena Khan published a paper that accused Amazon of being a monopoly. Having grown so large and embedded in so many industries, it was akin to a modern-day Standard Oil. Unlike Rockefeller's empire, however, Bezos' company had grown voraciously without much scrutiny. In fact, for over 20 years, Amazon had emerged as a Wall Street darling, and its customer obsession approach made it indelibly attractive to consumers across the globe. But the company was not benevolent. It operated in ways that ensured it stayed on top. Lena Khan's paper would light a fire in Washington, and in a matter of years she would become the head of the FTC. In 2023, the FTC filed a monopoly lawsuit against Amazon in what may become one of the largest antitrust cases in the 21st century. With unparalleled access and having interviewed hundreds of people from Amazon executives to competitors to small businesses who rely on its marketplace to survive, Mattioli exposes how Amazon was driven by a competitive edge to dominate every industry it entered, bulldozed all who stood in its way, reshaped the retail landscape, transformed how Wall Street evaluates companies, and altered the very nature of the global economy. It has come to control most of online retail and uses its own sellers' data to compete with them through Amazon's own private label brands. Millions of companies and governmental agencies use AWS, paying hefty fees for the service, and the company has purposefully avoided collecting taxes for years, exploited partners, and even copied competitors, leveraging its power to extract whatever it can at any cost. It has continued to gain market share in disparate areas, from media to logistics and beyond. Most companies dominate one or two industries. Amazon now leads in several, and all of this was by design. The Everything War is a definitive inside story of how it grew into one of the most powerful and feared companies in the world, and why this lawsuit opens a window into the most consequential business story of our times. The last nonfiction book I want to read is Negroland by Margo Jefferson, and she is an American author, and this falls within the genre of memoir. The description is, here is a deeply felt meditation on race, sex, and American culture through the prism of the author's rarefied upbringing and education among a Black elite concerned with distancing itself from whites and the Black generality while tirelessly measuring itself against both. Born in upper-crust Black Chicago, her father was for years head of pediatrics at Providence, at the time the nation's oldest Black hospital. Her mother was a socialite. Margo Jefferson has spent most of her life among, call them what you will, the colored aristocracy, the colored elite, the blue vein society. Since the 19th century, they have stood apart, these inhabitants of Negroland, a small region of Negro America where residents were sheltered by a certain amount of privilege and plenty. Reckoning with the strictures and demands of Negroland at crucial historical moments, the Civil Rights Movement, the Dawn of Feminism, the Fallacy of Post-Racial America, Jefferson brilliantly charts the twists and turns of a life informed by psychological and moral contradictions. So I've been struggling with a lot of nonfiction books lately because I just feel like the focus is on the content and not so much focused on the style. And I remember coming across this book last year and I started reading it and I had to look up a few words within the first page. And that's just so rare when it comes to works of autobiography or memoirs. So I was really interested in seeing how Jefferson plays around with style when it comes to this memoir. I've read a few memoirs so far this year and I haven't really enjoyed any of them, and I think this is probably the piece that is missing. An author who is interested in making a memoir that is unique and is a little bit intellectually challenging. Okay, so now moving on to fiction. The first book that I want to talk about is The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. And this is a Indian author and the genre is historical fiction. So, the description is, the year is 1969. In the state of Kerala, on the southernmost tip of India, a sky blue Plymouth with chrome tail fins is stranded on the highway amid a Marxist workers' demonstration. Inside the car sit two egg twins, Rahel and Estapen, and so begin their tale. Armed only with the invincible innocence of children, they fashion a childhood for themselves in the shade of the wreck that is their family. Their lonely, lovely mother, Amu, who loves by night the man her children love by day. Their blind grandmother, Mamachi, who plays Handel on her violin. And their beloved Uncle Chaco, Rhodes Scholar, Pickle Baron, radical Marxist, bottom pincher. Their enemy, baby Kochoma, ex-nun and incumbent grand aunt. And the ghost of an imperial entomologist moth with unusually dense dorsal tufts. When their English cousin Sophie Mall and her mother, Margaret Kochama, arrive on a Christmas visit, Estapen and Rahel learn that things can change in a day, that lives can twist into new ugly shapes, even seas forever, beside their river, gray-green. The God of Small Things takes on the big themes, love, madness, hope, infinite joy. Here is a writer who dares to break the rules, to dislocate received rhythms and create the language she requires, a language that is at once classical and unprecedented. Arundhati Roy has given us a book that is anchored to anguish, but fueled by wit and magic. So this book won the Man Booker Prize, I think it was back in 1997, and I have been wanting to read a book by this author. I've heard of her before, so I decided this was my month to give this a read. I'm actually not a huge historical fiction fan. I sometimes find the books a little bit boring, so I wanted one that was going to be a little bit more out there. The second novel that I want to read this month is called Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, and this author is from Iran, and the genre, from what I can see, it's considered to be literary fiction. So this book is described as follows. Cyrus is a drunk, an addict, and a poet, whose obsession with martyrs leads him to examine the mysteries of his past. Toward an uncle who rode through Iranian battlefields dressed as the angel of death to inspire and comfort the dying, and toward his mother, through a painting discovered in a Brooklyn art gallery that suggests she may not have been who or what she seemed. So I started listening to this audiobook yesterday. So far, it reminds me a bit of My Year of Rest and Relaxation, but with a queer BIPOC main character. So it's been really interesting so far. I'm really enjoying it, and I'm enjoying the idea of having like a very modern character who is dealing with their faith and their religion. So yeah, I've been finding this book really interesting so far. So the next book I want to read is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who was a Colombian author, and this novel falls within the genre of magical realism. This book is described as a novel that tells the story of the Buendia family and chronicles the irreconcilable conflict between the desire for solitude and the need for love. in rich, imaginative prose that has come to define an entire genre known as magical realism. So I am really trying to push myself out of my comfort zone when it comes to the books that I'm reading, especially the novels that I'm reading. And magical realism is a genre that I just do not enjoy at all. Back in high school, I remember reading like Water for Chocolate, and honestly, I didn't get it. I didn't understand the magical elements to it. And I think it's probably a reason I've struggled a little bit with Toni Morrison's work. I do really like The Bluest Eye, but that I would say is one that has the least elements of magical realism in it. Some of the others, especially like Songs of Solomon, I think it's okay, but I don't think I love it the way other people do, just because I don't really like magical realism as a genre. So I'm really trying to get myself out of that and appreciate the genre for what it is. And this seemed like a good one to start with. I've listened to a little bit of this audiobook before, and Marquez's language is just absolutely stunning. Plus, I think the idea of like the conflict between one's desire for solitude versus one's need for love is something that I can relate to. And so I'm curious to see what the author does with that theme or that idea. Oh, I actually almost forgot to mention another book that I want to read. I forgot about it because I only added it to my list this morning, but it is Blind Owl by Sadeq Hedayat. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. So he's considered to be one of the greatest Iranian writers of the 20th century, and this story tells a two-part story of an isolated narrator with a fragile relationship with time and reality. I'm not going to read the rest of the description because I don't really think it explains the novel at all. But it does say that Blind Owl joins the ranks of classics by Edgar Allan Poe, Franz Kafka, and Fyodor Dostoevsky that explore the dark recesses of the human psyche. So this is actually one of the Penguin classics, but I've been looking for classics by BIPOC authors. So I'm interested to give this one a read. It's like a 3-hour audiobook. I haven't really listened to it yet. I've just listened to the introduction, so I don't really have much to say about it, but I am excited to give that a read. Next, I want to read a few plays this month. I was trying to get into plays earlier this year and then I kind of forgot about it. The first play I want to read is Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. I've been wanting to go through reading Shakespeare's major plays. I've always found Cleopatra as a human very fascinating, and I've been wanting to read more and learn more about Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, and then Antony and Cleopatra. I know that's not really what this play is about. It's really just about Julius Caesar, but I think understanding the man then helps to understand that relationship a little bit more. And if you're not as like obsessed with Cleopatra as I am, what essentially happens is she meets Julius Caesar, they fall in love, I believe they have a child, and then he dies, and then she meets Mark Antony, and then he also falls in love with her. So I'm just so curious about like what sort of women had these two really interesting, powerful men fall in love with her. So anyway, this play is more about Julius Caesar and his murder, and the description is: fearful that Caesar will become a tyrant, his friends plot to assassinate him in order to save Rome. But the conspirators' high principles clash with personal malice and ambition, and as they vie to manipulate the mob, the nation is plunged into bloody civil war. A taut, profound drama exploring power and betrayal, Julius Caesar exposes the chasm between public appearance, political rhetoric, and bitter reality. Next month I want to read Antony and Cleopatra, so I figured it made sense to start with this play this month. I also want to read Huis, which is No Exit, and other plays by Satre. And he was a French philosopher, but also wrote works of fiction. I think philosophy can be quite inaccessible to a lot of people, so philosophers that also choose to write works of fiction which are much more accessible to the everyday person, I just really want to thank them for that. The book I'm talking about deals with 3 different plays. So first is Lucifer and the Lord, which explores the theme of the struggle to live and act freely in a complex and constricting world, and deals with questions of faith and disillusionment. Then there is No Exit, which contends that hell is other people, and details the afterlife of three souls trapped together in a locked room and the torments that they inflict on each other. And finally is A Respectable Prostitute, which is set in the deep south of America and is concerned with racism, subjugation, and the demands of conscience. I really want to read Being a Nothingness, but I know that jumping into a 700-page book about existentialism is not what I should be doing right now. So I wanted to start by reading some of Sartre's plays. Hopefully that'll allow me to start getting an understanding of his concept of existentialism before digging into some of his longer and I'm sure more challenging texts. The final book I want to talk about is The Essential Rumi, which is a poetry collection. So last month I read The Prophet by Khalil Gibran and I absolutely fell in love with his lyricism, and it made me interested in reading works of other Middle Eastern authors who are poets. This book is described as follows. Rumi's verse speaks with the universal voice of the human soul and brims with exuberant energy and passion. Rich in natural imagery, from flowers to birds and rivers to stars, the poems have an elemental force that has remained undiminished through the centuries. Their themes, tolerance, goodness, the experience of God, charity, and awareness through love, still resonate with millions of readers around the world. Thank you so much for watching. This channel is all about re-education and decolonizing the mind. I created this channel last year when I decided to go on a journey of re-education, and I decided to create this channel as a way to share all that I'm reading and learning with the world. If you are interested in following along with me on this journey, feel free to subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate all of the love and support, and I will see you in the next one.